Well, hello, everybody. And this is the last of the talks that I'll do in this series for this month. And then we'll start next month with the Heart Sutra. So I'll spend the month of March talking about the Heart Sutra. And what I'd like to do tonight is I'd like to tie up some material, bringing together some things that I talked about last month in the last talk about making life meaningful, with some things I've talked about this week, essentially on the three aspects of the path. And then sort of also prepare the ground for talking about the Heart Sutra next month. So the way I'd like to begin is by going back to the text of the three principal aspects of the path and looking at something in the section on wisdom. We've been talking about renunciation up to now, which I felt like I wanted to do mostly because I never talk about renunciation because it makes college students incredibly nervous when I do. So I usually skip over it. But I thought I would focus on it for this class or this series of talks, not class. And so let me screen share and take us to the text. Here we go. So this is in the wisdom section. Now this is as a recollection for everybody. There's a 14, the three principal aspects of the path has 14 stanzas. Tsongkhapa managed to put together the whole Buddhist path in 14 four-line stanzas. So participants, can you now see the application? Can everybody see the text? Yeah, a lot of heads shaking, thumbs up. Okay, good. So he starts off here by saying, you may master, and I'm going to read this because the last class, there were some problems initially with the way in which it was recorded. And I'm thinking that people couldn't see the stuff that I screen shared. Fortunately, I read it. So I'm going to do that again, just in case there are any other video problems. So the 9th stanza reads, you may master renunciation and the wish. Those are the first two principal aspects of the path. But unless you have the wisdom perceiving reality, you cannot cut the root of cyclic life, samsara. Make efforts in ways then to perceive interdependence. So a couple of things to say about this stanza. First off, when Tsongkhapa says, unless you have the wisdom to perceive reality, so that's what wisdom is. It's that which perceives what's real versus appearances, which is what we mostly experience all the time. So that's the distinction, reality and appearance. And that's sometimes also referred to as the two truths. So appearance is the truth of conventional reality, or it could be complete delusion. And the ultimate truth is the wisdom which sees what's really going on. So the problem with not having renunciation, as Gensona Rinchen described in some detail, is that you're stuck in cyclic life, in samsara. And the essential problem that we've focused on is a cognitive problem of overestimation and underestimation of the nature of reality. And I gave some examples of that in the past. But essentially, overestimation is seeing things as if they're better than they are, or somehow they're going to provide more happiness than they're going to. But anyhow, it's a distorted view of what things are, as seeing them as being more than what they actually are. And underestimation is seeing things as being less than what they are. Overestimation leads to grasping and the cycle of the 12 links. Underestimation leads to rejection and anger, actually, although the text doesn't say that, because we don't see the value of things, and so we push them away, and we're frustrated with them, and therefore we get angry. So this attraction and repulsion that drive us, right, keep us bound in the wheel of samsara. So he says you cannot cut the root of cyclic life unless you have the wisdom to perceive reality. But the way to develop that, what he says in the last line, is make efforts in ways then to perceive interdependence, which is to see appearances for what they actually are, right? So what this means is we live in the midst of delusion. We're completely deluded about what's going on around us. And the primary delusion is to not see how things are connected, to see things as being autonomous, to have the sense of things as having a fictional selfhood or entityness, if we're talking about things. But it's really the same thing in Buddhist philosophy. And when you see things as being interdependent, you begin to see the reality of what's going on in the conventional truth of things in the world that we all live in. And eventually, when you truly see interdependence, you've cultivated wisdom, you've achieved wisdom, because you really see the emptiness of things, in the sense that you see things are empty of autonomy or empty of self. Okay, so that's a really quick summary. I hope that's adequate to the task. I don't want to get too far into that. And you've probably heard much of this in other places before, or in other classes that I've taught. But the point is, he says, make efforts to perceive interdependence. This is the way out for all of us on the initial level. And there was a point when I was talking about a teaching that Lama Zopa gave, where he talked about walking with bodhicitta, eating with bodhicitta, sleeping with bodhicitta, whatnot. He was talking about ways in which you could bring a sense of interdependence into your daily life and cultivate the sense of interdependence. And I gave another number of examples of that, and I'll come back to that later this evening. And I mentioned, just as a reminder, that I find cooking as a great way to meditate on interdependence. And I may come back to that again today also. All right. So that's the technique. He says, a person's entered the path that pleases the Buddhas when for all objects in the cycle or beyond, which is to say, for everything that's experienced in the context of the two truths, samsara and reality, he sees that cause and effect can never fail. That's a way of understanding interdependence. But here is where things get, perhaps we might say, more spiritual or more profound. And when for him they lose all solid appearance. In other words, when you see how cause and effect can never fail, which is to say, when you really see how interdependence works, or see how dependent origination works, what that does is it erodes your experience little by little, like water sort of grinding away at rocks. It erodes the appearance of solidity of things, right? You actually begin to see things as being fluid, as being transitory is the key thing, as being changeable rather than just as there and given. So this happens slowly, but it can happen, okay? And for most people, it begins to happen when you're sitting in meditation, right? So I can sit in meditation in the morning and I can think about this, and I can get an intellectual sense that everything is transitory, that everything is changing, right? That my solid house, my appearance of a solid house is in fact changing. which is actually not too difficult to understand since it needs a paint job. So, that's a way of seeing that something has been going on. But you also can get a sense of your body changing. And I think that that's a little harder for older people. Begins to make more sense for middle-aged people. It's extremely obvious for elderly people, right? You really see that things are changeable, that they're not solid, and that they're not what you thought they were. Okay, so this is a gradual practice. Then he goes on to get into something that's fairly profound. He says, you've yet to realize the thought of the able, and here the thought of the able means Buddhas. As long as two ideas seem to you disparate, the appearance of things, which is infallible interdependence, so you're looking at the conventional world, and you see things as being interdependent, but you're still seeing the appearance of things, and emptiness, which in the prasangika point of view is beyond taking any position. What he's saying here is if you see the two truths as being different from each other, which is to say, if you see the conventional reality that we're in correctly rather than incorrectly, and you see it as a matter of a huge net of interdependent phenomena, as it were, and emptiness, which is first the intellectual and then the direct experience of everything that appears to you is constructed by your own mind, right? That you're projecting into the phenomena that appear to you all kinds of characteristics, overestimation and underestimation, for example. When you actually see that process going on and step outside of it, then you're seeing the emptiness of phenomena. And you do this first intellectually, and then you do analytic meditation on this kind of theme. You try to really pay attention to this. And eventually, you actually experience it. You actually experience the empty characteristic of phenomena. And in the Heart Sutra, it's like saying, maybe it's not the Heart Sutra, maybe it's the Diamond Sutra. Anyhow, in the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, they say you start seeing phenomena as being like bubbles or lightning flashes, things that appear in the sky and then disappear, right? Or phantoms, in the sense that you recognize that essentially everything has a dreamlike characteristic in conventional reality. And you actually directly see it that way. When that happens, you're really liberated. So, this is an incredibly high achievement, right? But it's something that we can cultivate an understanding of, and we can begin to practice with. And the more we practice with it, the more we become free, because we can see the way our minds work. We can see the way we're locked into certain notions about reality, and we can begin making choices. And, last week I said, it's like with chocolate cake. A piece of chocolate cake is good. Is the second piece of chocolate cake going to be good, or is it going to make you sick, right? Well, maybe the odds are it's going to make you sick. So you can decide you're not going to eat the second piece of chocolate cake because you know it's going to make you sick. Metaphorically, that's like understanding phenomena and not grasping at them, right? Not overestimating that the chocolate cake is going to be wonderful in the second piece like the first piece, or underestimating, which is like to say, well, it's not going to taste good at all. And so then you can make a choice. You could make the choice to eat the second piece of cake and get sick. That's perfectly okay if you're making the choice and you know what's going on, right? Then there's some freedom there. So he says, as long as your understanding is that these two things are separate, you don't really get it. If you think of emptiness and the appearance of things as being two different things, then you don't get it. You're stuck. You're caught in samsara. So you've yet to realize the thought of the able, which is the perception of the Buddha, that they're not separate, that all phenomena are empty, and yet they do have an appearance. So Shakyamuni Buddha could have conversations with people, even though presumably, even though he knew he was talking to phantoms, people who thought that they existed when in fact they were in the process of ceasing to exist, moment by moment, old age, sickness, and death. Okay, he says, in your meditation, if you're advanced, at some point, they no longer alternate, come together, they come together. Just seeing that interdependence never fails brings a realization that destroys how you hold to objects. And then your analysis with view is complete. So that means then when you're doing an analytic meditation on the correct view, you've gotten the correct view. You can either get it intellectually, which is a great achievement for most of us, or you get it experientially and you really start seeing it. And that's where liberation really exists on the Buddhist path. Okay, now, let me stop screen sharing for a moment. Okay, so this is all very advanced practice, but the steps to the path, Lamrim, explain to us how we go through that process, so we can get a realization. But then we have to recognize that we're not nuns and monks. We're people who live in the world. We're ordinary folks. And let me speak out of my experience indirectly. I pretty much come to realize that I'm not going to get liberated in this lifetime. Now, of course, my friend Bob Thurman has said one of the reasons that Americans don't find liberation or enlightenment is because they believe they're not going to get liberated or enlightened. So he would chastise me for saying this. But I think it's fairly likely that at age 75, I've pretty much done my thing. And the odds of my being able to become liberated between now and whenever I die are not really great. And to achieve this kind of experience of liberation, directly seeing emptiness, for most of us, is that going to happen? I mean, monks devote extraordinary amount of time cultivating shamatha, one-pointed awareness, and on that basis practicing. And for most of us, even when I'm in a really good, really deep meditation, I'm constantly being assaulted by fantasies, and it's just stuff that pours through my mind. And so I'm constantly having to, pull myself back, remember, as in the example that Lama Yeshe gave us about, when thoughts occur in your mind, you pull back from them and you meditate on the clarity of your own consciousness, right? So this is a practice I do. So I'm constantly extracting myself from fantasies. It takes a while to even notice that I've gone off on a fantasy. Like, whoops, okay, there it goes. Okay, now I have to pull back up from it and try and focus on the natural luminosity and clarity of my own awareness. And I can hang out there for a little while, and then I get swept away by another fantasy, some more thoughts, or my knees are bothering me, or my feet have gone to sleep and they're tingling, it's driving me crazy. Or my back hurts, or the dog in the yard behind us is barking like crazy, or some truck goes down. I mean, it's endless distractions, endless distractions. So what does this mean? Does this mean that, it's hopeless for us to even practice, that it's a waste of time? So I don't think that that's the case, or I wouldn't have been practicing all these years, because something does come out of the practice. I mean, for one thing, in my own experience, you can get glimpses of the deeper nature of your own mind. And my sense has been that as long as I can get these glimpses and sort of reside in those spaces, even for short periods of time, it changes the way in which I relate to my life when I'm off the meditation cushion. If nothing else, it gives me some relief from being so wrapped up in this samsaric situation that we're in, because there are lots of difficulties. I mean, I have health issues. There are many things that I worry about, some of which are absolute fantasies, stories that I'm telling myself that I shouldn't even be paying attention to. And some of them are realities that are really concerning. I mean, we live in the midst of COVID, right? I mean, that's a reality that we all have to be concerned about. So thinking about that fact is not a fantasy. On the other hand, if I were to sit around and freak out that I'm going to catch COVID and go to the hospital and die, that would be a story I don't need to hear. As long as I'm taking precautions, and then I don't need to be that worried about it. But it's a reality. Okay, I'm getting sidetracked. The main point is there's value in practice. Okay. Now, one of the things that Tsongkhapa is recommending is to see the way in which interdependence works, to see the way in which appearances actually exist, and to do that as a practice, right? So we've talked about that in the past. How can you actually do that sort of thing as a practice? And excuse me a moment. Last week, where I ended up was to assert that one of the ways in which you can do that is to start seeing life as art. Okay, and I didn't go into very much detail about what did I mean about seeing life as art. So that's really where I want to go now. But by way of preparation for next week, I want to say that seeing the actual empty nature of things and living in that space is what the Heart Sutra is all about. Okay. So it's worth knowing what that space looks like, in the sense of if you're an archer, you want to know where the target is if you want to hit it with your arrows. You may not be able to hit the target, but if you don't know where the target is, you're never going to hit the target, right? So it's worth knowing where it is. It's worth knowing where the goal is. And that creates a frame. It creates a sort of a context. But for us, we need to figure out as ordinary people, or I need to figure out as an ordinary person, how to live in conventional reality in a way that's beneficial to myself rather than totally unwholesome, and in a way that's beneficial to other people and the world generally. I'm going to be having some trouble with my voice tonight, I can see. And so that's where the idea of art comes in. And when I say art, I don't mean art as in painting. I mean, that is an art. But I mean art as a way of creating beauty in the world and in one's life, as a way of creating meaning in the world and in one's life, right? A way of living differently. And I'm not saying when I describe this, I'm not saying that I live in an artful life all the time, and that I live in a beautiful world all the time, and that I can make it beautiful or artful all the time. It's a practice like anything else. When I was a kid and I wanted to learn how to ride a bike, first I had training wheels. So I would ride the bike, and the idea is you have these little wheels on the back, and the bike sort of flops back and forth, but you never fall off. But eventually you have to take the training wheels off and ride the bike. And what that means is it means a lot of skinned knees in the very beginning, because you fall until you get the hang of it. But eventually you get the hang of it, right? So living an artful life is like riding a bicycle in that respect. Sometimes you get a nice ride, sometimes you get skinned knees. I think most of the time I get skinned knees. But still, it's worth trying to ride the bike. From my point of view, it's worth trying to live this way. Well, and it's not exactly just from my point of view, by the way. So, as I think I mentioned at some point in the past, I was trained in the practice of the highest yoga tantra by Tara Tulku Rinpoche, who was a qualified master. I mean, he was the retired abbot at Gyuto Monastery when I met him. So Gyuto is like, the Institute of Advanced Studies of Tantra in Tibet. Gyuto and Gyume monasteries were the place where, in the Gelug tradition, you went to really master the practice of Tantra. Oh, my cat Betty has just come to say hello to me. I felt this little rubbing on my knee. Anyhow, in highest yoga tantra, one of the things you do, which is different than some of the other practices in the lower tantras, is you don't just sort of invoke or create the presence of the bodhisattva deity like Tara or whatever. Do I see a cattail there, Anna? Yeah. Uh-huh. Actually, that cat looks like ours, which is interesting. Yeah. Except our cat only has one ear. Well, anyhow, without getting distracted by that. In highest yoga tantra, you practice being the bodhisattva. And the way that works, I talked about earlier. Like Zen, it's an effect vehicle versus a cause vehicle. Cause vehicle is you accumulate the causes of enlightenment. An effect vehicle is you practice with the fact that Buddha nature is already within you. Okay, so you become a bodhisattva. You practice being Tara. You practice being Manjushri, or whatever the case may be. And one of the things Tara Tulku said was, when you're practicing, you really want to see the entire environment around you as being the mandala palace of the bodhisattva deity that you're imagining yourself as being. Imagining yourself as being is a complicated word. I mean, you actually are Manjushri already, because you have Manjushri, you have wisdom within you. It's just sort of hidden, right? But you bring it forth to the degree possible. And then you be what you already are potentially. And, bodhisattvas live in heavenly worlds. So you imagine the heavenly world around you, which is to say that you have to change your vision of the world, right? So you don't see ordinary conventional reality around yourself, but you see sort of superimposed on it this deity realm, this bodhisattva realm, this pure land, superimposed on ordinary reality. Now, in the context of what we just read in the three principal aspects of the path, that's like when appearance and reality no longer alternate, right? But here you're using your imagination to impute the reality on appearance, all right? So you do see the two as being different if you're like me, to the extent you can do it at all. If you're like Tara Tulku, you don't see the two as being different. I don't think he saw them as different at all. I think he lived in that world. But he also said things like, okay, so that means now when you take a shower, you're not just washing your body, you're washing Manjushri's body. When you're eating a meal, you're not just feeding yourself, you're feeding Tara, okay? So, I mean, that's the level at which you want to really engage with this level of practice, right? Well, that's art. That's an art. That's like a dramatic art. It's like turning everything into a motion picture of a pure land that you place yourself within. Now, of course, this is very difficult, but that doesn't mean it's not worth doing. And to the extent that you're doing something like meditating on dependent origination of all phenomena, like, okay, I'm at the cutting board in my kitchen and I'm cutting up carrots, right? And instead of just seeing a carrot sitting on a wooden board, I'm seeing all the people that were involved in bringing the carrot to the wooden board, right? So that's understanding the dependent arising of that carrot on my wooden board, which I'm about to cut up, right? And then I think, okay, now I'm going to put it in a pot and I'm going to cook it into a nice soup, and my wife and I are going to eat it, and it's going to nurture our bodies, and we're going to be able to do good things or be happy or whatever it is, right? Right. That's seeing where things are going. And that's, if you will, visually and artfully deciding that this is what I want this food to become. I mean, if it's true that we live in a world of distortion because we over and underestimate phenomena and we don't see things for what they really are, right? That means we live in a world that's changeable. If we cease overestimating or underestimating what's going on and see things for what they really are, the appearance of things really does change, is what Tsongkhapa's telling us, right? So we can change the appearance of things in our own experience to some extent, right? We can see things as being wholesome rather than just absolutely neutral. I don't have to just look at a carrot on a cutting board and say, oh yeah, here's this orange finger-like thing on my cutting board. I can look at that carrot and I can think, this is going to make my body so happy. This is going to give me a good night's sleep. This is going to sustain me when I go out for a walk, right? I mean, it is. That's actually true. We just don't sort of see that, right? So we can turn our world through this kind of imaginative art into a different kind of place for ourselves. Now, is this fantasy? It's not really fantasy. It's actually coming to see what's going on in truth by using our imagination. But for ordinary people, of course, it would be fantasy. Like, you know, if I was talking to one of my nephews about this, he'd say, well, David's off in La La Land again. You know, this is my eccentric uncle. Like, you know, but it's the reality, right? It actually is. He's the one that's in La La Land because he just sees this orange thing on a cutting board. He doesn't see where it came from, and he doesn't see what it can become. He just sees it as it is, apparently, right? Apparently. He just sees the appearance of things, right? So, okay, now you get what it is that I mean by turning life and making life artful. And as I said, it's not really like I'm making this up. I mean, it's implicit in Buddhist teaching. It's just you don't find people talking about it too much. Last week, we talked about mirror-like mind. I gave the example in the poetry contest in the fifth Zen patriarch's monastery, where they talked about the mind as being like a mirror, and the mirror was covered with dust. So in ancient Chinese poetry, dust, especially the red dust or the yellow dust, the dust of the world, that is the world. Dust is the world. The red dust is the world. So it's worldliness that's covering the mirror, okay? And Lama Zopa went a step farther, and he described it as slime. Well, I don't really personally see the world as slime that's obscuring my consciousness. I tend more toward dust than slime. Slime bothers me a little bit because I think there's too much that's good in the world. And honestly, there's a lot in the world that is terrible. I mean, right now, the Russians are invading. God, I hate getting old. I can't even think of the name of the country they're invading. God, it's so embarrassing. Anyhow, there's a war going on, right? You know, I mean, it's outrageous what goes on in this world. And we're caught in it. I mean, we have to eat to live. And even if we're vegetarians, as the Dalai Lama has pointed out In the process of growing food, many beings are killed, right? There is no way to live in this world as a mammal without doing some degree of harm, right? We're really caught. And in that sense, yeah, the world is a slimy place. But in another sense, it's not, you know? And anyway, all of this stuff can be turned into compost, and good things come out of compost, right? You just have to decide that you're going to turn things into compost. Oh, that's another art, right? You can compost the world and make it grow beautiful things. Okay. So here I'm talking a little bit in the abstract, but I'm going to take a diversion into looking at this in a more concrete and an aesthetic way, I guess I would say. So I'm going to do a screen share, and I'm going to show you some examples of people who've done just this in their painting and in their photography, and talk a little bit about how they do it, and take this as a metaphor for how we can do this in everything we do. And essentially, it's a matter of framing or reframing, which is an interesting word. So let me do a screen share here. Oops. Wait a minute. This is going to take a minute. I have to get the text off the screen, and I have to find something else. Here we are. Okay. Now let me go back to screen sharing this image. Oh, come on, Zoom. My Zoom is being really slow tonight. Oh, I hope this is going to work. Here we go. All right, now I'll do the screen share. Here we go. Okay, you can all see this Chinese painting. This is, as I recall, from the 13th century Song Dynasty. So this kind of art is really the consequence of the interaction of Taoism, Buddhism, Confucianism. What the artist has done is emphasize this tree above everything else, sort of like pulling it out of the forest, if you will. And in the background, there's a large empty space, which is all foggy. That's usually a symbol in Chinese painting of shunyata, emptiness. And there's a moon up here. There's a moon, which is generally the symbol of the mind, the mirror mind. So there's a lot of symbolism that's in this painting. And of course, there's a man contemplating things here. I'm not going to get into the symbolism of the painting, but what I'm going to point out is what the artist has done is to emphasize some one thing, which in this case is this tree. And of course, in the larger space of what's going on here, which is outside of the frame that we don't see, there are a lot more trees. There are a lot more mountains. There's a lot more mist. There's a house down here, and we only see part of it, or a building of some sort. There's more to it, but we don't see that. So the framing has emphasized a certain something. And the ancient Chinese paintings did this in many cases, not in all cases, but it was something that they did in certain kinds of cases. Okay. So it's the framing that emphasizes the tree, the empty space because of the way in which the mass of land is down at the bottom and there's a lot of empty space up above, and this little moon that's kind of buried in the mist there. Okay. It's the framing that causes us to look at this. Okay. Now, hopefully I'm not going to mess this up. Okay. So I stopped screen sharing. Okay. Let me go back to screen sharing. But not yet. Wait, I have to do something else here. Okay, screen sharing is stopped. That's fine. Now I want you to look at this. It's going to take a minute for this image to render on my screen so I can screen share. My computer seems to be particularly slow tonight. Come on, open up. I don't believe this. My whole talk, there we go. I was going to say my whole talk is about to fall apart. Okay, back to Zoom. Okay, and now screen share. Pardon the commentary that goes with this, but it's like elevator music. Okay, this is a photo by Ansel Adams. So what has Adams done? Basically, he has looked at this tree, these rocks, this mountain in the background, and he's framed them. And there are other trees around and there are other rocks around, right? But he's framed this tree and these rocks. And so what comes out is something extraordinarily beautiful. Now, he's bringing our attention to this very beautiful thing that's going on. If he hadn't framed it in this way, we might not see it, or we might see it really differently. Okay. So what he's chosen to bring to our attention and not bring to our attention is what creates this composition and this beauty. And I don't know if he knew anything about Chinese landscape painting. Sure looks like he might have from looking at this, but okay. All right, now let me do something else. Okay, we've stopped screen sharing. This is just the way it's going to work. So your patience, please. So here's something else that Ansel Adams has done. Okay. Now we're going to screen share. Your cyber glitches are not just you. Be careful with cyber activities as this war. I missed it. Oh, please don't read this. Okay, I won't. I'm sorry.
My next thing was please don't read this out loud. But the thing is, we're being warned that this war is not just a ground-based one, and that we need to be careful of our activities like banking, etc., and Zoom online right now.
Okay.
This war. Okay, bye.
Okay.
I mean, I'll stay, but
yeah, I get it. Thank you. All right. Oh, I've lost the image. Let's see if we can get it. Okay, can you see this image of the trunk of a tree? Yes? Okay. So here what's, okay. Would somebody say yes, they can see the image, or shake your head? Yes.
Yes, we can
Thank you.
see.
I see
Okay.
your screen, but the tree, I can see all your files, though.
Well,
all
that's all
your
right.
files.
As long as you can see this image, that's all that matters.
Okay.
So what Adams has done here is he's gotten really in close to a tree trunk, and he's framed it in a certain way. So now we see the fluid dynamic movement of the tree trunk, which might otherwise have eluded us. We wouldn't see it, right? So again, it's all a matter of the framing of what he's doing that brings out a certain beauty or a certain meaning that was always there, but we might not have noticed it. We could have walked right by this tree and not particularly seen this dynamic fluid movement that we only see because of the framing. And so that's the key word, the framing. So I think I maybe have one other thing or so to show you, but I'm not going to do that. So I'm going to stop the screen share. So here in a visual sense, I'm trying to give you the idea of the art of life, which is to reframe or to put a frame around what we're doing with our own imagination. Because that's what's done in Tantra, right? You use your imagination in a certain creative way. So here in ordinary reality, I'm saying, this is the art of life, which is reframing things or framing things in a certain way. And it's not actually that we even have to change anything, right? It wasn't that Adams changed the tree. He just looked at it in a certain way. So it's not like we have to change the world. We just have to look at it in a certain way in our framing. One of the ways we frame it is by meditating on dependent origination, as Tsongkhapa says, which is intentionally bringing our minds to see the way things arise. But another way we can frame things is to look specifically in the world for the beauty that's already there and pay attention to it, which is the thing we tend not to do, right? Because what we tend to do, because of our own impulses, the way we're driven by samsara, is we look at what's given to us by our habit patterns, which has created the problems all along, right? So those habit patterns drive our attention. And if we're a fearful person, because that's the way we were raised, for example, or the kind of lives we've had that we developed a lot of fear, then we start seeing threats all around us. That's the way we framed our experience of the world, that it's full of threats. But we can reframe it and say, threats aren't just threats. Threats can also be opportunities for practice. I mean, and that's sort of standard Buddhist lore, which is, seeing things as opportunities for practice. So again, it's all a matter of framing. And that's sort of the essence of this kind of art. Nothing else special required, right? And yet if you're doing it, you're doing what Tsongkhapa is advising in that stanza, which is to practice little by little, seeing what's real. And beauty is as real as anything else. Actually, maybe beauty's more real than anything else. I would like to think that way. I'd like to think like a Navajo, right? The Navajo say, walking beauty. That is their practice, walking beauty, right? So, okay, that's pretty much where I want to end this evening's talk. And where I'll pick up next week with the Heart Sutra is the flip side of this, which is the emptiness side, the target, the goal, right? But the goal, the target, the emptiness side is also a reminder that everything is mutable, everything can be changed, and that there's freedom in that. There's freedom in all of that. All righty, so that's it for me for the evening. If you have any questions or observations that you'd like to share, please do unmute yourself. And if not, I'll see you next week if you come next week. So where are we at?
David, I just really like how you incorporate Ansel Adams to a Japanese woodcut, to the Beauty Way poem. This is just such a refreshing class. Thank you.
My pleasure. Well, this is for what it's worth. This is what happens when you have an overeducated professor. This kind of stuff. Because I did Asian studies, so they give you history, they give you art, they give you everything. And anyway, I'm an old codger. I've been around a while and I've looked at a lot of stuff.
And you make it accessible, David, like the way, so to bring that 9th stanza from Tsongkhapa into framing, but giving us that visual, it just, for me, for my learning style, it's like, wow, now that really makes sense.
Great. Well, that's the way it works for me too. That's why I do it. I mean, I'm around all these. If I was in Portland, I'd be around all these abstract intellectual philosophers, You know, they think logically and all this kind of stuff. And that's not the way I think. I think metaphorically. So images for me are what explain things. And that's the reason I teach this way, because I don't know how to think any other way, you know. So I'm glad it works. I am glad it works. And by the way, just before I answer your question though, or yours, Ada, by the way, I think I mentioned this in the past, that my entree into Buddhist thought was an art history class. And specifically, when the teacher showed Song Dynasty landscape paintings, I took one look at them and I said, reality, I need to know more about this, you know? And it was reality to me because of camping in the High Sierra in California and visiting Yosemite when I was 5 and having my mind totally blown. And so the teacher said, if you want to understand this, you need to start learning about Zen. I said, okay, that's what I'm going to do. Alan Watts, here I come, because that's who was available at the time, was Alan Watts. So it stuck with me. So I'm really glad to hear it works for you, Mary. That's very reaffirming. Thank you. Lou, you had something you wanted to say? You're muted, Lou.
I think Aida wanted to say something first.
Well, there's room for both of you. What is it you wanted to say?
All I wanted to say is it's an old expression and it has nothing to do with learning. It's just that when I attend your class, I get the warm fuzzies. That's just it. That's all.
Oh, that's the best compliment. Thank you so very much. Okay. Ada?
Professor Aida.
Aida, okay.
Yes. Professor Komito. Yes. I appreciate a lot that you brought art and beauty into the conversation. I am fascinated by this world. I'm fascinated by the beauty of our bodies and our mechanism. I'm fascinated by nature, and art itself is just something, I'm very visual. So thank you for bringing that up. And also I wanted to ask you, you mentioned that you have translated Nagarjuna, correct?
Yes.
Will you consider a talk on the middle way?
Well, that's what I'll be talking about next month.
Okay.
So
As part of the Heart Sutra.
The Heart Sutra is the middle way.
Okay. Yes.
It is the middle way.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. And I'll try and remember to be very explicit about the way in which it's the middle way. And if I glitch and forget, because I do a lot of that, remind me that I said I would do that and use that language explicitly. Okay, anything else? And if not, I need to clean the dishes from tonight's dinner. Okay, thank you so much for coming. What's that, Mary?
When you mentioned the Navajo, the Beauty Way,
Yeah.
I actually have this on my desk. Can I read the poem real quick, David? May you walk with beauty before you. May you walk with beauty behind you. May you walk with beauty below you. May you walk with beauty above you. May you walk with beauty all around you. May you walk with beauty. It's called the Beauty Way.
Right. Yeah, I get it. And my wife is an artist, so I don't have any opportunity to forget it. All right, thank you so much. See some of you next week or all of you next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you, David. Thank you, everyone.
All right.
Thank you, Mary. That was beautiful.